Will you check, is my microphone, will you unmute me? Okay, good. Testing, good. All right, we're just gonna make sure that the sound is working.
Got too good Wednesday night.
No, it,
I turned your volume way down
yeah,
and left those where they were,
uh-huh.
but it didn't sound like it was picking up anything hardly any.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit because I could hear conversations at the very beginning of it, but there may just be some tweaking of the actual microphones, and I'm learning about that. But I was overpowering anything that was coming through
Yeah.
on the singing part of it,
But
you
I
know,
turned yours way down,
way down,
but it was still
still loud. Yeah, yeah. All right, we'll get started here pretty soon. Will you check, is my microphone, will you unmute me? Okay, good. Testing, good. All right, we're just gonna make sure that the sound is working. No, it, yeah. Yeah, I think it was a little bit because I could hear conversations at the very beginning of it, but there may just be some tweaking of the actual microphone, and I'm learning about that. But I was overpowering anything that was coming through. We'll get started here pretty soon. Oh gosh. Will you check, is my microphone, will you unmute me? Okay, good.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm so thankful that you're here. It's a glorious Sunday morning. I'm thankful for the sun shining. Yeah, would you hit record on that real quick? I forgot to hit actual record on the button there. There you go. Thank you, sir, very much. It is a glorious morning. The sun is shining and a good, crisp, cool morning, and I appreciate that. I like it. I told Kira it was God's air conditioning this morning, and I like that kind of weather. It gets a little bit of a pep in your step. This morning we're starting a new class called Crisis Management, and the idea is that we have got lots to learn from the book of Job. And I think it's so appropriate for us to turn to this book right now and talk a little bit about that and why it's appropriate. Today is more of a introduction into what we're going to study over the next several weeks that will give us some historical background to this book, a little bit of details about things like from the author to the date and those kinds of things that I wanted to cover, but also just the overall theme of the book and kind of a brief outline of the book as well to kind of get us geared up for it, to remind us about what this book is about. It is one that you probably have studied before, or you've read it and are familiar with the story of Job. If anything, I think our world is familiar with the story of Job. There may be other obscure lessons and stories from the Bible that our world is not aware of, but Job seems to be one that people understand, that Job had great possessions and a great life and lost it all and questioned his own existence and struggled through that, had counsel from his friends, and then everything is returned back to him double portion. The world knows that story, but it's good for us to be reminded of this as well as we're going through some times of crisis right now. So I want to encourage you, turn over in your Bibles to the book of Job. We're going to hit some of it in the text a little bit maybe, but more than anything, we're going to just do an overview of it this morning, and then we'll get into the text. We'll probably cover chapters 1 through 3 next week, and the reason is because you really can't, for me, it's just really difficult to go through this book verse by verse. I've done that before. I think I've mentioned this when I first started preaching. I took, I think, probably a whole year with a little bitty small church on a Sunday night studying the book of Job. We went verse by verse, and it wears you out. And I am thankful for the grace of that church and letting me do that. I learned a lot, and the main thing that I learned is to not do that with the book of Job anymore. It's more important for us to look at it maybe from a thematic viewpoint, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. I'm thankful we are live streaming right now, and I've left the TV up here so that people at home can make it easy to see what's on here as well. Now, I know you're probably thinking, why is the font different? It's different there than it is there. I'm testing a new little feature that I have with my iPad and the Mac and everything, and there's little bitty things that are not exactly right. But if anything, it makes it easy. I can just advance, and it'll go right here with the TV, even though the font is just a little bit different. Now, I do want to mention something very, very quickly. I don't know if you have heard. We're going to mention this again during our worship service later on. And Matthew has a message for us later on that is appropriate to this announcement. But our sister, Amy Fairchild, passed away last night. And she had been sick for many, many years. And you know this. And this is a family and an individual that we've prayed for diligently. And she was able to go home Sunday with hospice care this week, and we've been in contact with them all week long, and elders have gone over there to visit with them, and she is at peace. Let me tell you this. On Friday, Margaret and I were finishing up a little few details about the bulletin, and we were discussing what to put in there for Amy, and we thought, well, maybe we should put in there, Amy is home with hospice, but we decided, let's just put Amy as at home. And if there is ever a truer statement today to think about, that's it. Amy is at home. Now, it's difficult. I sat there and I debated. I debated this morning about coming in and teaching this class. How do I deal with this, and how do you deal with this? And if there's ever a time that we need to turn to the book of Job and learn about how to go through a crisis, now is it. And so I don't want to change anything about what we're going to study this morning in Bible class. Now I know Matthew has changed his sermon for this morning because we feel like as a church family it's time for us to heal from that. And he's going to address those things later on anyway. That sermon that he had prepared will be put off another time. But what we need to do is take care of each other. And so that's what we're going to do. But in Bible class, bear with me, we're going to go through crisis management. Because if there's ever a time that a family right now is dealing with the crisis, how do they deal with this? This is it. And I think it's appropriate for us to study this and to think about that. So I'm thankful for that. And I just ask that you be gracious and prayerful as well as we go through this. The title of this series describes the resource as well as the reality of the purpose of these lessons over the next several weeks and really several months. This book of Job will be the main source to help us be able to see what the model life should be during a time of crisis. During a time of crisis, we can look back to see what we can learn about a crisis situation from the book of Job. And we can see exactly what our attitude should be during a time of crisis. I'm thankful for that. Let me ask you this, and give me some feedback. What is a time of crisis? How would you define that? What is a time of crisis? Sure. So it does depend upon the person, but a lot of times we think of emotional or physical hardships, right? Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't hear you. Yeah, something as simple as losing a job. You know, somebody say, well, either I got laid off or I got fired or, the business went bankrupt. That's a time of crisis. Absolutely. What else? What else could be a time of crisis? Yeah, something that requires your immediate attention. You can't say, well, I'll just put this off for a little while. No, it's got to be dealt with right now. Absolutely. That's a good way of looking at it. Anybody else have feedback? Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I kept thinking about this word turmoil is what I kept thinking of. It's a state of turmoil in our lives. And even not just... it doesn't just affect you. Sometimes it affects those that are around you. Those challenging episodes in our personal lives. I kept thinking about when someone moves, when they start a new job, when there are relationship changes. Those are times that can be a crisis situation. But you know what? It is so rare for the entire world to be going through a time of crisis like we're dealing with right now with this pandemic. It really is. And with this, not just, the health crisis and how to deal with that, but economic crisis and just the polarization of different views. It is a time of crisis. You have people on one side and people on another side. And that is a time of crisis when we are so divided down to whether it's a hoax or whether it is something that's real. We have people on both sides of that. And just that idea right there is a time of crisis. Now, let me ask you this. What is faithful living? What is faithful living? Let's define that. Okay, sure, an ultimate trust in something that's larger than yourself. Sure, absolutely. Anybody else? We're told to live faithful, aren't we? We know what that means. We know that in order to be faithful to God, we have to not just obey His commands, but even have that right attitude and strive and work towards that. I don't know about you, but my faith sometimes is on the downward trend. And I have to figure out and notice those trends and then bring them back up to where they need to be. And I'm in flux all the time. You know, I want it to always, my faith to be climbing, but there's times that it's going down. And when I'm plateauing, I might as well be going down. But I'm constantly doing this. Am I the only one that's like that? I'm wondering. Anybody else feel that way? That you just constantly are up and down in your own faith? Yeah. That's a way of life, I think. Faithful living is when we demonstrate how Christians strive to live for God in both good times and in bad times, right? Faithful living is not just saying, well, I'm going to be faithful to God because things are so good right now. So easy for me to be faithful right now. But being faithful to God, I think, is even more tested when we're going through trials and when we're going through times that are tough and difficulties. And it is that rock and that everlasting shelter that protects us in that time of crisis. Faithful living is how we respond to this pandemic that's going around us. Faithful living is how we respond when a loved one passes away. Faithful living is how we respond when we comfort another family that we love so dearly. That's faithful living. It is a light and it is a witness to the rest of the world on what it means to be Christian and how we believe and how we trust. A world that's being further thrust into sinfulness and wickedness and sin, we say, we're going to live faithful. That's what it is. That's what we're striving to do. So this morning, when we're studying the book of Job, we're going to go through this and learn some things, I'm hoping. So let's learn from Job. I thought I did that, but I did not do it. I thought I had those things. Okay. Job's reaction was a messy reaction. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. And there's two things that I want us to think about. Job's reaction was messy, but he was a real man. A real man. Job is this character that we read about who really, his life and his experiences resemble the same natural experiences that we have today when we deal with crisis. Job experienced, like a one-man pandemic, where everything just seemed to fall apart for himself and even, of course, those around him. But he's left there and sitting there trying to figure out what to do on his own. He's beaten up and he's bruised and he's suffered this terrible, terrible loss. And his experience and his reaction to those messy times it's not necessarily like this heroic thing that he's done. When he dealt with this, he just sat there, and just deals with it. And that's when his friends come, and we'll read about that later on. But he's a real man. And Job's life provides this example of someone who is faithful and who is sincere. He was imperfect, but he was real, and his reaction was real in the eye of a storm. Right there in the real. He is a real person. And the man and the story of Job is valuable to us, especially as we're learning to go through something that none of us have ever gone through before. Something we've never had to face. And so when we look to see, how do I respond to this? Because I've never done this before. Job is such a fantastic example for us. Well, how did Job respond? Because he's going through something he had never gone through before. Complete loss of everything. Everything. The story of Job, we know this, but we'll read about it next week. He lost his kids and their families. He lost his wife's faithfulness. He lost his own health. But what's the one thing Job did not lose? You know this answer. What is it? His faith. His faith. And that's why he serves as such a great example to us. We need to look back to Job as a real person. And here we are going through something that we've never gone through before. And maybe every day is like that for us. I've never gone through today before. That's true. Today is a new day. And so Job serves as a great example for us for all of time. He shows us what we should and what we shouldn't do. And Job's life was a mix of good and of not so good. And there are things that happen to Job that are even unanswered and unresolved. You know, you don't get to the end of Job and you say, well, now I know, why this has happened. Job can't look back and say, okay, now I get it. I get it. And so we can totally relate to a man like Job. His reaction was messy, but he was a real man. All right. Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah. 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 Well, I think the answer to that is, just short, yes. Yes, your faith can be strong, but you have to be intentional about it because you're being bombarded by all kinds of outside influences telling you that this is the way that the world is. This is what reaction that you should have to this. You should have this kind of reaction because you believe this, or you live here, or your skin color is this, and so you have to react that way. And that's not the way we have to look at it. We have to look at it like, well, what does Job do? What does the Bible teach us? And that's how we react with our faithful lives. Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the importance of the book of Job, the date of it, the author, and the style of this book. Martin Luther says, it is, talking about Job, it is magnificent and sublime as no other book of Scripture. Magnificent and sublime. I thought that was a fantastic way of putting a good description on this book. Too often we focus on so much of the story of Job that we fail to really appreciate the quality of the style and the expression of the author. Some have referred to the book of Job as the Bible's Shakespeare. It's just so artistic. And when we go through this, I think you'll see the great art that is there in this literary style that's there and how important it is. Now, the date and the author of this book, it's very fuzzy. We don't have exact concrete answers to the date nor of the author. A lot of speculation is there with who wrote it and exactly when it was written. There's no clues in the book itself on who wrote the book or the date of the authorship at all. A lot of people have said, well, perhaps Job himself wrote it. Some people have thought maybe Elihu, one of his friends, wrote this book. Some have said that Moses wrote the book, or Solomon, or just like an unknown Jewish exile, from 600 BC, wrote this book down. It was accepted as Old Testament Jewish scripture around 150 BC, but the story is known to be older than that. It is probably one of the, if not the, oldest book in our Bible. The story that's there, the idea of Job being this patriarch, no mention of a covenant, no mention of a law of any sort. You have this story of Job that dates pre-Abraham. So that's why we say it's got to be older than that. And that's an interesting point to make and something to remember as we're going through what's happening here. Some people have thought, well, maybe it was just a story that was passed down orally over so many years and then finally was written down. And that's a pretty good estimation, I think. It's a good answer for that. But no matter what the case is, it is a fantastic book and one that is considered to be essential in our Bibles today. The question is it historic or is it poetic? Now, a lot of times when you read, and see divisions of the Bible, you see that Job is coupled in there with books of poetry, Psalms, Proverbs, and Song of Solomon and Job. It's just kind of put in there. And a lot of it is very much that way. It also is a very historical book. So you think, well, is the book of Job purely historical about what happened to this man and his family, or is it a work of fiction that teaches important theological ideas and principles? The earliest Jewish teachings claimed that Job was historical, that it is a work of poetic imagination set in a historical framework. So you look at it like, here are the things that were written poetically in this historical setting. I think about like maybe if you were to watch I love these kinds of movies, those historical dramas, something that is historical, but it has a drama twist to it. I like that. One of the most recent movies that I watched that was like that, movie Midway. I love that the attack on Pearl Harbor. It's a historical movie in the sense that it's about a historical event, but it's very much a drama, So that's kind of the way the book of Job is written. We see this historical event, but we get to see all the drama that's behind it. Matter of fact, I'm going to make mention of this later on too. I feel like the book of Job is a perfect movie. I'd love for someone to make a movie about this. I think it'd be great, or even like a play. It'd be so easy to do some kind of a play about it, but it'd be wonderful. Anyway, any questions or anything about that? Anything? Okay, let's talk a little bit about the purpose of the book of Job. And the focus of the book is that the problem of innocent suffering. And we see that everywhere. The more important focus for study is the fact that it is a book about innocent suffering. It deals with the patience of a good man while he was being tested by various trials. James writes, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be complete and perfect, lacking nothing." It's James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Every time that I read that passage, I think about Job. He is somebody that went through that. And I don't know if Job really did consider it joy while he was going through that. I don't think so. I don't see that. But I do know, looking back at it, we look at it and say, man, I've gone through that, and I can consider what I've gone through and think about how I've grown and how I've endured through that. And that's a good thing. And I think that's what James is telling us to do, and one that we can look back to the book of Job and say, that's what I can do with Job. See his experience. The experience of Job points back to this false teaching that was prevalent at the time, which taught that personal suffering was always the result of personal sin. So if you are going through a difficult time, well, then you must have done something wrong. You have got sin in your life, and therefore that's why you're suffering. That was a false teaching, and one that Job with himself. There's no evidence that he did not believe that even. This is something that he struggled with. In other words, God punishes sinners in real time. Like if you do something wrong, then you're going to be punished immediately. You do something wrong, you're going to be punished immediately by God. And we know that that is not the case necessarily at all. The punishments of sin, you may not ever even see them until later on in your life, or may not even see the physical consequences of those bad choices in this lifetime. But here, these people thought, if you've done something, or if you've got bad things happening to you, then you must have done something wrong, and that's a false teaching. We ask that question: well, what did I do to merit this? What have I done wrong? People say that kind of thing all the time. It's called, nowadays we call it karma. That's what we call it now. It's very much from the Hindu and the Buddhist religions, where if you do good things are going to happen to you. If you do bad things, then bad things are going to happen to you. And we see that teaching in the book of Job, especially from his friends who come to try to counsel him. They're the ones that are going to say, what have you done wrong? What have you made this mistake in where now you're having to suffer this way? And so the teaching which he ascribed to, but it did not match his personal experiences. Job was a good man, and he just could not understand why he was made to suffer through those things. He knew God was just, so he not only suffered, but had no way to explain why he was going through those tough times. And so his friends pointed to sin in Job's life. He must have done something wrong. Now, the comprehensive idea is that the book of Job deals specifically with very real problem of innocent suffering. The focus of the book is this idea that why do innocent people suffer, or why do unfair things and unjust things happen in this world? And in this case of the book of Job, it really gives us this particular case and extraordinary circumstances where Satan personally attacks an individual, and God lets it happen. God lets it happen. Why? Why is this happening? Well, there's more to it, and we'll see that next week when we cover more. But and so we are looking at this as witnesses to the developments, and the eventual outcome is that that Job is faithful and receives everything that he had lost plus some. When he is restored back at the very end of the book. We know that. We understand that. We can see the big picture here. So we're looking at it not the way that Job did. So everything that Job sees, he doesn't understand it happening to him, or why it's happening. Matter of fact, he is never told in the book of Job, hey, Job, you know, all these terrible things happened to you because me and Satan had this conversation at the very beginning of it all. And I allowed these terrible things to happen to you. I allowed Satan to work himself in your life to test you. Job is never told that. He's never told this is why you went through that tough time. It just resolves at the very end of it that he just is able to have everything that he had back to him, double the amount. So there's so much that we can learn from Job because Job has real feelings. Job feels. He has great shock at losing all the material things that he had. I think my Bible gives kind of an estimate, and we'll get to this too. 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys. That's amazing. When you talk about 500 yoke of oxen, 1 yoke of oxen is 2 oxen, so that's 1,000 oxen. You know, that's amazing to me. He had a lot. He was extremely wealthy for his time. And consider, honestly, even now, he'd have to be a pretty rich man, even now, to have that much in livestock. You know? I know people that have a lot of cows and a lot of cattle and everything. I don't know anybody personally that has 7,000 sheep. I don't know that. But if someone does, they have a lot. Very, very much well off. But he loses every bit of it, and he feels shock from it. He feels sorrow and grief after losing his family. He feels pain and suffering because of his illness. The Bible it describes these boils that are on the top of his head and on the bottom of his feet, all over his body. Oh, how miserable and how uncomfortable. He couldn't lay down. He couldn't get comfortable. He couldn't even stand on his head if he wanted to because these boils are there. There's no way. He's miserable. Miserable. Humiliation at the loss of prestige and respect. He's feeling frustration and anger at this injustice and this unfairness of his situation. That's what he feels. Job has real feelings. That's why we can identify. That's why we're going to be able to learn so much from this. He may have also been among those who believed that that personal suffering was because of God's judgment upon his sin. So he may have dealt with that. We mentioned that already. And he may not even, he couldn't figure that out. He couldn't piece those things together just yet and how that was happening. Well, we can learn so much from Job because we can relate and understand him. We're witnesses of this. We're able to look back at it and read about it, and we can see the sufferings and the feelings and how he deals with this as being a human being. And our life lessons come from comparing his life experience to ours in some degree or another. We may experience shock at times in our life, and sorrow and pain, humiliation, frustration and anger, and desperate despair. Of course, we can really experience all of these emotions at the same time even, and deal with them individually, and sometimes we deal with them collectively as a church, don't we? And Job, his experience mirrors ours when we go through those tough times. When we look back to how he was faithful, and maybe we can learn something and we can relate to him. It's almost like you can look back to the book of Job and it's this one-stop example of how a believer dealt with suffering he didn't understand and didn't deserve. And the book of Job does not provide some kind of nice, neat bullet point outline for how to deal with difficult things. Here's the answer to everything. It doesn't do that. Instead, this book and this man presents how someone can live faithful, even in the midst of turmoil and crisis. He's not perfect, but he serves a perfect God, and through that relationship that he has with him, he can deal with it, and he can make it through. Our own life lessons, therefore, will come from examining Job's journey from a blessing in his life to this suffering and then being blessed all over again. Let's talk a little bit about the organization of this book. And let's see, I think I've already hit a lot of this. Yeah, it presents how one man lived through the faithful life. Okay. All right, so it's good for us to have some kind of an idea of an outline of this book. My Bible gives me one. I have a great Bible. I don't know if anybody else is shopping for a Bible, but I have a good one called the Ryrie Study Bible, and it gives me good outlines. So my Bible has an outline. Your Bible may have an outline too, the book of Job, and that's kind of helpful to see the progression of it all and to see how it all works. But we'll get to that here in just a minute. I want to quickly go over some of these characters in the book of Job. This book could, like I said, be filmed like a movie. Most of the action revolves around two people at two different times, between two characters, between God and Satan, between God and Job, between Job and friends. You see this happening all the time, and you can see how a movie would progress through that. And that's just a beautiful thing. So let's talk a little quickly about these characters. You've got the character of Job, obviously. Wealthy man from the land of Uz, which would be modern-day Saudi Arabia. He is a historical figure mentioned alongside of Noah and Daniel in the book of Ezekiel. He was not an Israelite, like I said. There was no references to theological elements in the book like a covenant or a law. The temple or even the name Yahweh is not mentioned in this book, so it doesn't have any indication that he's an Israelite at all. He's just a man of God. He was blameless, he was upright, and he's a man that feared God and he shunned evil. That's what we learned from him from the very beginning. He had grown children, 7 sons, 3 daughters. His sons themselves were also wealthy, and they hosted lavish feast. The book of Job talks about them having these almost like a big birthday party with this great festivities going on to celebrate their birth. And so you kind of see that they're very wealthy as well. And we'll learn more about Job and his experience as we go through this. Then you've got Job's wife as another major character, and there's not a lot of details that are mentioned about her at all. Some Jewish folklore gives her name as Sittis, which is a root word for Satan. I think that's interesting. It's so, appropriate in some way. Not all wives are that way. I'm not trying to say that, but she was definitely an antagonist in this story, and not kind of the bad guy's aspect of the book. All the Bible records that at certain points she encourages her husband to curse God and die in order to put an ending to his suffering. That's what we have about Job's wife. Not very helpful at all. Yeah, that's right. Just to be right there. That's the thing. It's so important to remember. He didn't lose his wife. He lost her faithfulness because she turns against him and tells him to curse God and die. That's what he lost. She stays right there with him through this whole time and mocks him almost, and mocks God for all the suffering that he was going through. Anyway, it's interesting. All right, then you've got this character of Satan, and he is referred to as sons of God, an angel referring to as sons of God here in this book. And this term Satan only appears 3 times in the Old Testament, and every time it means this word adversary. And that's what he was. He was an adversary. He was the bad guy in this movie that we're watching and reading the play about right now. He's able to exist and he's able to move in both the physical and the spiritual realm. It's so important, though. I don't know, kind of pause here for a moment because I really want you to know that Satan is not all-powerful. Okay? Sometimes we forget. But Satan is not all-powerful. Satan is not everywhere. And Satan is not all-knowing. If he was, then he'd be God. He would be omniscient. He'd be omnipresent. And he'd be omnipotent. Yeah, I was thinking what's the other word. He'd be all-powerful. He'd be God. Satan does not. He doesn't have that power now. People think, well, Satan is everywhere. Well, not really. He has influences everywhere. Satan is limited. You have more power over Satan. You've got an avenue to God in prayer. You've got God on your side. And Satan is not all powerful. But Satan is given some liberties here. God grants him some liberties. But it's so important to realize Satan does not know everything. He's not all powerful and he's not everywhere. He's limited. So important for us to see that. But he is responsible for Job's suffering, as we'll learn as we review everything that's going to go on happening here. But the key to the story is that we'll know what is going on behind the scenes. That's the key to it. We'll see all that. Job doesn't see Satan working. He doesn't know that character is there in this movie. He doesn't know it. But we get to look back at it. Then you've got Job's friends. And it was custom at that time that your friends would come when you were going through difficult times to come and encourage and mourn and help you get through those things. It's very much our culture today. You go and we sit with people. You just, what do you need? Your prayers? I just need your presence. Just be there for me. Well, that's the same kind of thing. And they come and they visit him, and they're there to help him. Now, his 3 friends are a guy named Eliphaz. His name means God is fine gold. He is a descendant of Esau, and he was old, and he was devout, more gracious than the other friends, and some have referred to him as a mystic of that era. Today you might classify him as more like a liberal. Then you've got Bildad. And he was a descendant of Abraham and Keturah, his wife, after Sarah died. And he's been called a scholar or a traditionalist according to the way that he spoke, the things that he said to Job. And he's kind and sympathetic, more so than Eliphaz in his comments to Job. And he stands for giving direct, easy things to see. And he's just a little bit more direct. Then you've got Zophar. You know what his name means? Male goat. Zophar. He's dogmatic. He's intolerant. He's wise in his own eyes. He's unmoving and he's judgmental. Today you may classify him as being legalistic. Then you've got this young friend, Elihu. And his name means he is my God. He was the youngest of all the four, and he waits. All the other friends, they speak, and Elihu, maybe out of respect for the older guys, waits for everybody to say their things, and then he finally gets up to speak, and he rebukes the other friends. But still he repeats the same argument. Finishes by correcting two of Job's problems that he thinks he has. That God is unjust somehow, and God refuses to speak to Job. That's what he tells him. So he's not very helpful. None of them are really all that helpful, and we'll talk about that. Then you've got God that appears in this story. He does not appear to Job in order to comfort him or to explain, but rather to reveal himself more clearly to Job. Remember, he does not say, okay, Job, listen, you're going through this tough time because I've let Satan do this. No, he doesn't do that. He just says, I'm God. I'm God. And I love the phraseology. Where were you, is what he asked Job. Where were you when I did these things in creation? He just wants to remind Job that when you're going through a crisis, God is. He's there. And he reveals himself to him. All Job can say is, I've been in the presence of God, and now I understand more. And that's what we find out. All right, let me give you just a quick little outline of it. This is a good way of looking at the book of Job. Chapters 1 through 3 deal with Job's distress. Everything that bad happened to him. Then you've got Job's defense. Chapters 4 through 37. This includes all of the friends' conversations and everything. And then you've got Job's deliverance in verses 38 through 42. That's a good way of breaking up this book. It kind of gives you a real quick glance and all the details that happen in that. And you can see it in a chronological order of how it all happened. The story and the sequence of how it all came about for Job. But then you've got another way of looking at it. And this actually is the way that we're going to study it over the next few weeks. We're going to do a thematic outline because we're dealing with a topic. We're dealing with crisis management. Okay? So instead of just going verse by verse like I did 20 years ago at the Oak Church of Christ and wore those people out on Sunday night, I'm going to take a thematic view of it. And I want us to look at Job's physical crisis, chapters 1 through 3. Then we'll examine the theological crisis, chapters 4 through 37. And this is where Job's friends attack. Then we'll look at the spiritual crisis, chapter 38 through 42. This is where God challenges Job, and Job's faith saves him, and he's restored back to what he had before. What a beautiful picture of this. In our next lesson, next week, we'll look more into this text of the book of Job to familiarize ourselves with this Old Testament story and help us answer some of these questions of why do we go through these difficult times? Why do I suffer the way that I do? Let me give you some homework, okay? I like giving homework in my Bible classes. I do that for kids, and I'll do that with adults. Please, please, please read chapters 1 through 3 between now and next Sunday. Because when we go back through it, I don't want to have to go through verse by verse. You don't want me to do that. So if you already know what the text says, that'll help us get through it a lot better. So just read it yourself. If you're driving, put it on maybe an app on your phone where it'll read to you so that you can understand and get familiar with the text. So we're not going verse by verse, so it's so important for you to read ahead. And I want to encourage you throughout this whole time to read ahead, because when we go through this in the next few weeks, you'll be familiar with it and we'll be in good shape. All right, any questions or comments? We are right out of time, and we'll end this here in just a moment. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. 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 I don't know. I'm not sure I understand your question. Let's talk about it here in just a minute. Is that okay? All right. Yes, ma'am. Mhm. Yes. So these guys are not descendants. These guys are not. Abraham was a descendant of these friends of his. So Abraham, the friends here, and then generation, Abraham is born. Did I misspeak that at all? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you.